Okay, the room's nearly full, so I think I might as well start. Welcome. My name is Trisha G. I'm a developer at 10gen. We're the guys behind MongoDB. And today, I'm not really going to talk to you about backwards compatibility, actually. I will mention it, but I'm going to talk to you about software design and approach to design. So I was looking at how to design an API. The problem we're working on at the moment is around designing an API. So I looked up this. This is the sort of thing you see when you're at university and you learn about the software delivery lifecycle, or when you read anything from big organizations about what software design is. Design. Translate the requirements in a specification that describes the global architecture and the functionality of your system. If you're still awake, you'll be getting this idea that design is this process of converting a requirements document into a series of tech specs. Sounds like something which can be done in some sort of automated way. And this is further backed up by the sorts of things we see. This is from the original paper that spawned a lot of the waterfall process. And you can sort of see where it got the name waterfall, right? And that's, you don't need to read the actual words, you just get the idea that at the preliminary design stage, the outcome of preliminary design is things like document system overview and allocate this and do one of these. The idea that the output of the design phase is a series of documents. And this is kind of what we were taught back in the day if we went to university, or what you're taught when you read books, which some of us do. But it's not really what we do on a day-to-day basis as developers. In fact, if we're working in an agile way, we've probably thrown away a lot of the stuff that we thought we were going to do in terms of design. So I don't think design is a document. The design is a process that you go through. Design is the process that we all do when we're developing code. But we don't really talk about design anymore because we talk about coding, we talk about clean code, we talk about standards, we talk about agile, and we talk about working code software over comprehensive documentation. We don't really talk that much about how we do design, but we're all doing it every single day. I wanted to explore that a little bit more and talk about how we really do design on a day-to-day basis as developers. So design is the journey, it's the process, it's not the outcome, it's not the destination. There might not even be a destination, but you're traveling on this journey, you're implementing stuff, you're told to achieve something, but it's not like university where they said, do this piece of coursework and it's finished, or achieve that and it's done. It's always this ongoing process. It sometimes feels like it's never ending, right? Fix this bug, add this, change that, do the other. And when we embrace the fact that our development process is like this, it's this journey, we realize that design is not something that's done up front or even necessarily at milestones along the journey. It's something you're doing all the time. And along this journey, you're going to meet monsters that need to be slayed, and you're going to reach save points, at which point you can be quite happy. And as I said, you might not even reach a destination at the end of this journey. So I'm going to share with you my journey, I guess, of designing the new MongoDB Java driver. So now I work for 10gen. I joined them about 6 months ago. And they wanted me to work on the Java driver. And the idea I had was there is a Java driver for MongoDB, and I will be doing what we normally do as developers. I'll be doing enhancements, bug fixes, features. As the server gets new features, I'll be adding them to the Java driver, and I'll be doing that. And I might be doing some of this conference stuff and blogging as well at the same time. It's all part of my job. But what I didn't realize is that, until I joined them, that we're actually rewriting the entire Java driver from scratch. And this, as a developer, this is the best thing ever, right? We have a specification, we have a working driver, we have a server which has a documented set of features that we need to support. So how hard can it be to write a brand new driver that does the same stuff as the old driver, supports all the features on the server, but is better in every single possible way? How hard could it be, right? It's what we all want to do. So we set off on this journey. And the idea here was to bring... obviously, the question you should ask is, why are you rewriting the driver if you've got something that works? And the answer is that the driver's getting, it's been around for a little while, and we wanted to write it taking into account some modern Java practices, like generics, which have only been around for nearly 10 years, and the driver doesn't support generics yet. But we also want to steer it in the right direction for future Java stuff, like lambdas. Have you been to any of the lambdas talks? Or heard anything about the new collection stuff? I mean, that's pretty cool, right? I mean, I quite like the idea of using a more fluent API or being able to pass in bits of behavior. Especially as a driver, that's really useful. So we want to move towards, as Java evolves as a platform, and as we as developers evolve and learn how to learn new best practice, and fashions change and the way that you program changes, we want to evolve the driver to do that as well. And we thought the best way to evolve it was to start again. May or may not have been our best laid plan. So talking about different versions of Java, I haven't written library code before. I haven't written a product that you give to people before. I've worked on enterprise software. I've worked on platforms where we had a public API which you couldn't change, but ultimately everything behind that is yours. But I haven't worked on something where you create something, a library, and you hand it off to other people and say, go play, go use that. Run it in your own environment. And I learned that this is an entirely different set of skills. Because I want to use lambdas and I want to use Java 8. It's not even out yet, but I want to do that. But a lot of our customers are still using Java 5. So how can we create this brand shiny new driver that we want to do whilst also not alienating our customers who might be, we don't want to say to them, you have to upgrade to Java 8 just so that you can use our new driver. And the only reason we made it use Java 8 is because we think it's cool, not because it gives you anything extra. It's just the same thing it was before. So I found my biggest pain point was this backward compatibility thing. And it's not something that we think we have to worry about all the time, although if you do have APIs, even if it's just an API for a single service on your application, you do have to think about it, the idea that maybe you can only add methods and not delete stuff. So this is the first monster that we faced, but this wasn't the only one. Oh yes, so the other thing is not just about versions of Java, but it's about things like if we want to move it forward to have a more fluent API or a shinier this or a better that, and our existing customers are already using stuff, and we've got apparently loads of existing customers, and some of them even pay us, even though we're open source. We don't want to say, right, okay, you guys who are using the old version, then I don't care about you anymore. We only support the guys who use the new version with a new version of Java, and the rest of you you're just going to have to upgrade when you get a chance to. And we don't want them to have to rewrite all of their DAOs or their repositories or whatever you want to call their data access layer. Why should they have to rewrite all of their code just because you wanted to play with new stuff or make things better? You don't really want to do that. You need to be able to maintain the existing customers and move things forward. But we also don't want to maintain two code bases. There's really only two of us working on the Java driver. And I don't want to be working on one thing while the other guy works on the other, or I don't want to be splitting my time between the 2.x branch and the 3.0 branch, because that context switching is going to kill me. So I need a way of being able to move the thing forward whilst also not annoying anyone else. But there are a bunch of other problems, like what are our requirements? Why are we doing this? What are we hoping to get out of this? Who are our users? It's open source. People can download it and use it wherever they want. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what sort of data they're putting in there. We don't know whether they do lots of burst access or if they do lots of steady access. We don't know if they're latency sensitive or throughput sensitive. We don't know if they care about the garbage collection profile. We don't know whether we support functionality like custom encoders. We don't know if anyone's using that. We hope not, because we want to deprecate that. How do we deprecate things? At what point do we take it away? So we had lots and lots and lots of questions. And probably the first month or so, maybe more, of me being there was basically asking a lot of these questions and being involved in lots of conversations with not just the two of us who are working on the Java driver, but the C# guys, because there's a C# driver, and their driver is possibly a bit more advanced than ours. I shouldn't really say that, it's on video and everything. They're using more modern forms that we'd like to go to. They actually have an architecture, they have a design, and it looks kind of sensible. And it's, of all the drivers that 10gen supports, and we support 12 different languages, the C# one is much closer to Java than any of the others, no matter what we might think about that. So we had a lot of conversations with those guys, we had a lot of conversations with the other drivers, with the server guys, with the community, and we ended up just having lots and lots of questions about what we should do. You can end up in a stalemate. So what we did is we came up with a set of design goals. We decided what our requirements are, and obviously our requirements are things like support the existing functionality. But we needed to document this so that every time we had a conversation with another driver developer, every time we had a conversation amongst ourselves, every time we spoke to the community, we could come back to this and say, what was it we were trying to do? What was it we were trying to achieve? You know, when we're trying to weigh up this solution versus that solution, we can go back to our goals and say, well, this meets more of the goals, or this one meets this goal and this one meets the other goal. So by actually writing those down, yes, in a document, we actually could make some progress. We could figure out what it was we were trying to achieve. And you'll notice here, this is the actual document. You're not supposed to read that, hopefully, because I don't even know if it says anything we're supposed to say. It's a Google document, and it's not a formal tech spec. It's not something some architect said, you know, do it this way with this headings and these, that. We just made a list of things that we really, really cared about. So things like judicious use of interfaces, exception hierarchy, prefer immutability, things like that, stuff that was important to us. We wrote it down so that we wouldn't forget it, and so that when we were having conversations, we knew what was important. There's the sort of top-level, most important things of the design goals. I came up with consistency, cleaner design, intuitive API, sane exception handling, test-friendly, backwards compatible. I'm going to go over some of these throughout the rest of the talk, but not all of them. It's not really so important what our goals were. The point is that we had some. The first thing that kept tripping me up, though, was the lack of consistency in the code base. Actually, it's not just in our code base. It was the lack of consistency across all the drivers. We've got these 12 different languages, there's 12 different ways of doing things. We name things differently. Sometimes it's find, sometimes it's search, sometimes it's filter. We have all sorts of, so that's kind of across the broad level. In the Java code itself, sometimes the fields are at the bottom of the class, sometimes they're at the top of the class, sometimes they're named in a C++ way, sometimes in a Java way. And for me, because I'm enormously OCD, if anyone knows me, this kept tripping me up. I couldn't think about design because I kept hating this stupid method name. I kept hating the fact that sometimes the curly braces are on this line and sometimes on this line. And you can't think big picture when you're constantly tripping over these things. And the thing is as well, I was making loads of progress by fixing all the consistency problems and by making it look more the way I wanted to. And I felt like I was doing a lot and achieving a lot. But at the end of the day, I wasn't. I was just moving code around so that I felt better. So yes, so our second thing was this lack of consistency. It's very distracting, and we didn't have this idea of ubiquitous language. So if you've done anything around domain-driven design, you know that the ability to say a word and have everyone interpret it more or less the same way is quite important. The language we use shapes, you know, what we do and what we achieve. So the lack of consistency meant that we were always miscommunicating between ourselves by using the wrong words. So we implemented some coding standards. Which, if anyone knows me, they'll probably not be at all surprised. So I thought, we'll put in check style, we'll put in PMD, we'll put in find bugs, and we'll do all that stuff. And I thought everyone was really going to hate that because I made the build fail when check style broke. And I thought everyone's just going to scream at me because they're like, it doesn't matter, it's not important. But in actual fact, everyone really liked it, because they could stop worrying about that. They know that the build is going to pass if they get it right. And they can stop doing code reviews based on where fields are or what method names are, and they can start doing code reviews based on what does the design look like, what are we trying to achieve with this. You stop asking the little questions and start asking the bigger questions. So last week, we finally got all our errors down to 0. I was so excited. And everyone else, all the other developers are like, oh, Trisha will be really happy now, this is awesome. I'm like, yes, it's cool. We started off with over 6,000 check style errors, 200 find bugs, nearly 100 PMD errors, and yeah, now we've got 0. But that's just like, that's the smallest thing, that's just consistency. It just means we don't have to argue about stuff anymore. Yeah, well, so you have to maintain it, yeah, but that's why the build breaks if you don't follow the rules. Next up, users. I don't really mean that users are monsters, by the way. I'm sure our users are lovely people. What I mean is that we didn't know who they were. We didn't know what they did. We didn't know what they want to do. We don't know. When we improve this API, we're doing it for those guys, and we don't really know who they are or what they want. So we can't continue to just design this just for us. I mean, we could. That's fine. We could make it all lovely in Java 80 just so that we feel good about ourselves. We could make it pass a bunch of check style tests. We could make it pass performance tests. We could make it do all this stuff and make ourselves feel really great about the good quality code we're doing. But if we haven't asked the users what it is they actually want, if we don't even know who the users are, it's kind of pointless, right? No one's going to use it. What a waste of time and effort. So we couldn't really go and speak to all of our users because we don't even know, like I say, who's downloaded it. But we did identify that there are 3 different types of users with 3 different types of use cases. We've got Java developers, obviously. The whole point about the Java driver is that obviously, it kind of sits in between the MongoDB server and your application. So your application talks Java to the driver, and it can talk protocol level down to the server. So you don't have to do that stuff. Brilliant. So we were always thinking about the Java developers, because that's what we thought was our main use case. But we don't just have Java developers who are coding against it. We've got ODMs, so object document mappers. It's like Hibernate, but for document databases. We've got other drivers like the Scala driver. We've got other JVM drivers. And we have third parties like Spring Data. We have other things that wrap the Java driver to provide you, the application developer, an easier way of interacting with MongoDB. So we don't just have people coding against the public API. We have people who don't really care about the public API, but they're reusing things like the connection pooling and the protocol layer and stuff at a lower level. And then thirdly, we're an open source project, so we've got people who are hopefully going to submit pull requests. We've got people who actually want to code on the code base. And you could also argue another customer, apart from the external contributors, are me and Jeff, the 2 guys mostly working on the Java driver. So we're users too. This comes back to a point that I think was made in the keynote yesterday. Having habitable code, having code that you want to live in, that kind of makes sense to you, where the design is very clear from the code, what it's supposed to do. And if the design is clear in the code, I don't have to write loads of documents or tutorials or blog posts about it. You can kind of come along, read it, get the intention from the code, and submit a great quality pull request without me having to say, you've named this wrong and you haven't done that, and it shouldn't be here, it should be over here. It should be much easier for you to submit something. And that makes my job easier. I don't have to do as much coding. Or I can do more exciting coding. It's cool. So these guys have all got different requirements around our design goals, if you like. The Java developers care about the API. Oops, sorry. The same exception handling. It's got to be test friendly, backwards compatible. Fine. The third-party libraries don't care about the same things. This is kind of obviously these aren't binary things. They only care about those things. But you know, on a rough scale, these are the sorts of things that people care about. And the contributors, again, they care about slightly different things. And this allows us to give weight to different goals, depending on who we're talking to, depending on who's not most valuable to us, but what it is we're trying to achieve with those goals. So the best thing to do is talk to those users and find out what they need to do, what they want, what are they trying to achieve, and be able to have the conversations around the design goals that they're going to care about, rather than worrying about everything across the board, all users across the board, and everyone we don't know about. Just kind of get an idea of who they are and what conversations you want to have with them. And once so we're going to try and this windy noise is really distracting me. I don't know about you guys. And one of the things we do, because we're open source and because we're a very community-type based company, we can actually talk to our users with things like going to conferences, with things like blogs, with things like we've got Mongo user groups, we've got Java user groups. I ran a tutorial at QCon, a sort of hack session really, rather than a tutorial, saying, this is what it looks like at the moment, give me feedback. And we have things like office hours where users come into our office and say, I've got this problem. And it's a really great way to get some feedback from individual people. And maybe even say, with some of the guys who come to us with questions or whatever, we can even ask them, do you want to try using the new version for now and see how you feel? Just a thought. once we've got design goals, and once we've identified more or less who our users are, then it's a lot easier to talk about architecture. You can't really talk about the architecture that it's supposed to do if you don't really know what you're trying to achieve with that architecture or who's going to be using it. And we actually did a UML document, and I feel really dirty. It's not right, right? We did not write a UML diagram and generate code from the UML diagram. We definitely did not do that. We generated the UML diagram from the code. Obviously, that's a sensible thing to do. And this is not a prescriptive document of this is exactly the design and this is how it should go. This is something that evolved out of the code that we'd been writing. We kind of wrote this code that made a lot of sense, and we wrote a load of tests around it. And when we were kind of happy-ish, we generated a diagram like this, and we went back to the other driver developers and said, look, given where we're coming from and given the things we've been thinking about, we think this is what the architecture of drivers generally looks like. It's got different shapes of concerns. So we've got things which handle the protocol layer, we've got things that handle connections, we've got things that handle special cases like this thing called GridFS. We've got this idea of the domain of having databases and collections and CRUD operations that you can do on those things. So once we kind of had this diagram, we could color code it and give people an idea of groups of functionality that sort of live together. And this is not, like I said, it's not prescriptive. This is so we can put it, we all work really distributed. So it's on the wiki, and we can have like Google Hangouts and say, what do you think about this? Or how do you feel about that? Or how do you do it in the Ruby driver? Or how did you address this in Python? And so it's a placeholder for a conversation, like a lot of agile story cards are. Of course, I like to hand draw stuff, so this is kind of how I sort of think about things. And this is where you come into the different users, the different use cases. So MongoDB uses a protocol called BSON, so binary JSON, which is kind of weird, but a binary JSON protocol. And we already had the idea of BSON being a separate specification in its own right. So we've got a layer which talks BSON. But we also have this idea of things like managing connections. And MongoDB is horizontally scalable, so you don't necessarily talk to a specific server. You kind of decide which server to talk to based on a number of different constraints. But the Java driver will do that for you. So there's a layer here, the connection layer, which is going to manage a lot of that sort of thing. And it's going to work out how to send the messages you want, like an insert or an update or whatever, which will be BSON messages, to the right server. That's kind of more or less what a driver does, right? So, and on top of that, so this is BSON connection layer. On top of that is the Mongo client itself. So that's the public API. That's where your application will get a Mongo client, and it will get stuff from that and do things on the Mongo client. There's a gap in between there because that's where all the other complicated stuff lives. But generally speaking, I sort of think of it as this sort of tiered architecture. And this works really well when you're talking about the other types of users. So one of the other types of users is the Scala driver. The Scala driver doesn't need the nice, fancy Java public API. The point about the Scala driver is to give a Scala API to the difficult connection management stuff. So the Java driver has two roles, or at least two roles. It's a JVM low-level driver, and it's a Java public API. So we kind of broke off the JVM management stuff and have that in its own separate thing. So the Scala driver just talks directly to the connection side of stuff without having to translate things into a Java-shaped object, which then turns it into a BSON-shaped object. It just goes straight down there and says, give me a connection, send this message. That's what it's supposed to do. And for me, this really kind of validated a lot of the thoughts we were having around the design. This must be the right way to go, because suddenly things that were difficult with the old driver are actually a lot easier with a new driver. So it gave us our cleaner design. Now, I didn't actually talk about backwards compatibility yet. I was kind of shying away from that monster. It's just been lurking in the background the whole time going rah at me. But in actual fact, our architecture helps address this point much more easily than we thought it would. So this is the architecture we were talking about. It's only 6 slides ago. You already remember that stuff. We've been thinking about the ways that we can provide the backward compatible API. We want a new API and an old API. We don't want them smooshed together. because we want new users to be using the new API. We want existing users to be migrating gently over to the new API. We don't want it all on the same class so that when you do, I don't know, mongo.find, you get 75 different instances of the find method. You've got no idea which one is the right one to use. And we don't want to have deprecated on 75 different methods, right? So we really want to provide two different APIs that can be used in parallel. One of the things we were thinking about to do this is we've kind of had this lucky accident, actually, in that the old driver is named, the namespace is kind of wrong. The namespace is in com MongoDB Mongo client, and it should be in org MongoDB. So we actually have this lucky accident, which means that everything which is old can be namespaced com MongoDB, and everything which is new is namespaced org MongoDB. You can wrap the new stuff. You can put the old stuff on top of the new stuff, delegate stuff through. And also, if the new stuff doesn't support some of the stuff the old stuff needs to do, it can talk directly at this connection level and bypass that. So you don't need to pollute your shiny new API with stuff to support the old API. And this is the way we were going. But we've been thinking, maybe the old API is just another client, the same way the Scala driver is, the same way the ODMs are, the same way Spring Data is. Maybe we don't even need to do that. Maybe we can just have it connect straight down to the connection layer and be its own separate thing. Both of these layers are very lightweight, so you can have them in the same jar if you want. You can be using them in the same place. But the point is the separation of the old stuff and the new stuff. The thing I like about this way, though, is I believe in IntelliJ, I think, because everything's going to be delegated through the new API, I reckon you can use IntelliJ's refactoring stuff to pull the new stuff through the old API into your code so you can gradually migrate to the new way of doing things. So I think that's one of the compelling things about this design. But this design means that we don't have this weird mix of new stuff and old stuff. Kind of, it's just another client, and you could potentially plug a bunch of different APIs on the front and not really mind about it. And again, this sort of thing validates that we've probably got the design in the right place. We've got the flexibility to have a number of different solutions which actually achieve what we want. We're not trying to hack stuff on top of other things. So how do we know we've actually achieved our goal of backwards compatibility? Well, firstly, it'd be nice if the tests passed. That will show you something. So we do have a bunch of automated tests. I mean, automated tests, by the way, are very, very good. You should definitely have automated tests. Awesome. We don't have as many automated unit/functional tests as we would like. Fortunately, a lot of our tests are functional, which means that they work at a much higher level. So you have to have a MongoDB server running in the background, and then they test different levels here. So if you run them against the old API running on the new architecture, you should be able to see the same stuff. That should verify the behavior. But there aren't quite as many of those as I would like. We've also written automated acceptance tests, which are meant very much to be from the public API outwards. And so we can really, not only do we test it from the outside in, but we're also testing against the public API, and we're documenting how to interact with the public API, and we're testing that we haven't broken anything from the public point of view. The other thing we did is we have an ODM called Morphia, which we also maintain inside Tengen. So we ported Morphia over to run on top of the old legacy API, and we saw if all of its tests passed. And eventually, after a little bit of tweaking, we got all those tests passing too. So that's great. Everything works. Except it's not quite there, right? Because we haven't tested it in the wild. We haven't really seen whether it's working in the real world. So there's a few other things that we're going to do as we're going forward. We have internal tools. We eat our own dog food. So we have internal tools which are running on MongoDB, which are using the Java driver. So we're going to port those over to use the sort of legacy mode of the Java driver, make sure everything works. And if it doesn't work, at least it's just our stuff that falls over, not your stuff. And hopefully also run it against, friendly small code bases where they don't really mind us if we put something in which is more of a release candidate than a definite, yes, we're definitely going to go live with that. And then eventually, of course, we're going to have it running in the wild, and then someone will probably come and tell us we broke everything. But this is going to be an iterative process from the sort of small unit test level up to sort of third-party test, out to our own internal tools, and then finally out into the real world. You can't just do it in Big Bang and say, good luck, well done. I'm going to talk a little bit about the intuitive API, because when I sort of said I was going to be doing stuff about the new MongoDB driver, and then I didn't really talk a lot about what it was going to look like, people were slightly disappointed. But, well, we'll see. The problem is about the public API is that we're definitely going to change it. All the names are going to change. The actual order we do stuff might change. We're really not ready to start giving tutorials on this is how we're going to do stuff. So if I come along and I show you a public API and say this is much better because of X, Y, and Z, and then you actually download the new driver in, I don't know, 6 months' time, it's completely different, then there's going to be a bit of a cognitive mismatch there. So I just kind of wanted to give an idea of where we were trying to go with the API and the sort of thoughts that we were going through. Again, this idea of constant design, this idea of thinking about what you're trying to achieve and going back to your design goals. Oh no, that's terrible, you can't read that at all. So it doesn't matter, because actually you don't want to be able to read the words because they're all going to change anyway. This is the shape of a query at the moment using the MongoDB driver. So you can do this idea of find, query, skip, limit, and it gives you back a DB cursor. In the new world order, it's going to look almost exactly the same, except that you've got an extra thing, a terminator on the end, which is all or one, to give you the idea of find all or find one. Or it might be find one and find all, who knows. So there's not a lot of difference in that, except for it looks a bit longer. But in the existing driver, we have this idea of we seem to prefer overloading methods. And so we have lots of methods which have got different syntaxes and different parameters. And those parameters might not always be exactly clear what's supposed to come in which order. So, for example, this takes two parameters, a DB object, which is a query, and a DB object, which is fields. And, heaven forbid you get those things the wrong way around. So we want to make it more explicit what you're doing. So we're going to say, filter by the query, select on these fields. Now give them all back. So you can see where I was going when I said we were quite inspired by the lambda stuff and the new collection stuff. We kind of want to make it this more fluent API, fluent DSL way of doing stuff. The reason being that in the old world order, if you do autocomplete, now this big thing about autocomplete on your IDE, and I know people have been saying real developers don't have to use IDEs, but lots of real developers do use IDEs, and this is what they see when they press control space, when they do find. And they see 3 find methods, and then they see 2 deprecated find methods, a find one, find and modify, find and remove, and they're like, oh my god, which one is it? I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So we were very much thinking about this, and now when you press you get filter. And that's what you can do. There's 2 options, and in the moment there's 2 options. One is you give it a document, and the other is you give it a convertible to document object. It's just a convenience thing. May or may not stay, subject to change, rah, rah. So that's the sort of motivation behind this idea of having slightly longer things, but much more descriptive what you're trying to achieve. Similarly with remove, it's the same sort of thing. It used to be remove by this query, now it's going to be filter by the query, and then remove. You get this idea of terminators. You build up your query, and then you say, now do it. The more complicated thing around for MongoDB is there's a find and modify command. And what that does is it goes off to the database, finds according to some criteria, updates those things according to some update criteria, and will either return you the stuff before it was changed or return you the stuff after it was changed according to some settings that you give it. So this is the default find and modify. So you give it the query and you give it the stuff to update to. And then New World Order, you've already guessed probably, you filter, and then you do something like a modify and get, or a find and modify, or a get and modify, or something like that. And you say what to do. But like I said, we've been preferring overriding in the existing driver. So when you do find and modify, you get this. And then everyone wants to kill us. It takes 3 DB objects, then a Boolean, then another DB object, and then 2 Booleans. And it's not at all clear what that's doing. Clearly, if you've got 3 Booleans, you've got a number of different combinations of operations you're doing, and it's not at all obvious which one you accidentally did. So, and this is what it looks like when you call it. So you give it a query, the fields to query by, the fields to sort by, a false or a true, an update, a true or a false, and another false or a true. And that doesn't say to me, that doesn't say in a sentence, in a descriptive and consistent and intuitive way, I am doing this. So what we'd like to do instead is say, filter by this, sort by this, then do a modify and get with your update, but give some sort of English language description of what you're trying to do. So get after the change was applied, or get from before the change was applied. And one of those booleans says remove it or not. So the method's going to be called remove, for example, rather than have a flag saying, do you want to remove it or do you not want to remove it? The whole point here is to try and make it so you can read the sentence. When you're reading the code, it says what it's trying to do. Filter this, do this, sort by this, and do this type of get, or and do this. That is, in theory, our Fluent API. Around the API as well, there's a lack of consistency around the API itself. I didn't put an example up, but things like the order of parameters is different for different operations. The fact is sometimes you can use overloaded methods, sometimes you can use this stream of methods, and it's kind of difficult to know what it is you're supposed to be doing. We're aiming towards consistency for the new API. So again, you get this idea of always doing this filter, and then you can do a series of things like limit and sort. And at the end, you can see different terminators like remove or count or get or whatever, so you can build up the query you're trying to do. I'm learning Spanish at the moment. This means totally dead. Definitely dead. I'm told. Is that right? So consistency, I'm not consistency is dead, consistency is alive. The lack of consistency is well and truly dead. But the public API is still haunting us. Like, for example, I can't give you a tutorial on what it's going to look like because we don't know what those names are really going to be. We don't really know if those terminators are going to exist that way. We have been talking to customers and users about this, and the thing is that lots of Java developers are more comfortable with the original way of doing stuff, where you have a series of methods which say exactly what they're trying to achieve, and you just do collection dot this and give it the parameters, rather than this more Fluent API, which is more Java 80, but it's a lot of people are saying, oh, it looks a bit functional. Well, I don't think it is, because you could have done that in Java 1. Really, there's nothing to stop you. It's not using lambdas. It's not using anything funky and new. It's just a taste thing. It's more of an evolution towards this way of doing stuff. And I'm sure in 5 years' time we won't be doing it like that either. We'll be doing something completely different. So the sort of last save point or safe haven that we've got to is this talk. The whole point is this is part of the design process, to come out and to share with you the pain of going through the design process, some of the things we've been thinking, the questions we've been asking, the things we've done, the fact we've even done documentation, heaven forbid, and kind of wave some stuff at guys who either are interested in MongoDB and might want to feed some stuff back, or people who aren't interested in MongoDB at all, but are interested in design and in Java and how we should do this sort of thing. And I was really, really interested in, quite a few people in this conference have been talking about back to basics on the principles of design. Sandro was talking about principles and solid principles and things like that. And I think that we as developers should be getting, should be thinking a lot more about design as part of our everyday job. We do it already. This is what we do. When we're deciding, should this go here? Should I do that? Is it a new class? Am I inheriting? Am I delegating? Should I use some sort of pattern? This is something we do all the time, but we don't necessarily call it design. And we often think, oh God, I don't want to do design because I don't want to do a document. But you are doing design all the time. But let's think of it as an iterative process you are having to go over. The fact that you're not just a typist, you are a human developer, and you're converting some set of requirements out there into a design which is codified. It's in the code you write. The specification is often in the automated test that you wrote. That's your documentation. So I'm going to move on to a Q&A, but this is a Q&A with a difference, because I'm going to ask you questions, which is quite difficult because I can't see anyone because these lights are enormously bright. But is there anyone in the audience who's using the existing MongoDB Java driver? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's good, I think. Sorry. Are you using the driver natively, or are you using it with something like Morphia or Scala or anything? Anyone who's using it natively? Anyone who's using Morphia? No one. Anyone who's using Spring Data? You've put your hand up for both. That's not fair. Okay, that's interesting. That's worth knowing. Scala driver? No one. No Scala people in the room. I thought they'd come to heckle. Awesome. Anything you particularly like about the Java driver or working with MongoDB in Java? Please share with the class. Nothing. Please say something nice, please. This is my job. Wow. That's damning. Oh, yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. So Vertex, the Vertex framework, and that calls down to the Java driver. Okay, cool. I hadn't looked at that, but I hadn't looked at that. That's interesting because that sounds like something we really would like to encourage more of. Okay. Any pain points from the existing Java driver? Because you can say there's no pain points too. That's awesome. It just means no one wants to say anything. The aggregation framework's difficult to use from the Java driver. Yeah, we haven't started looking at the aggregation framework yet, so I'll put that on to do. Awesome. You had something. Okay. Well, that's interesting because I've heard a number of people are using their own mapper on top of the Java driver, and I think one of the things we'd like to do is one of our original design goals was make it easier for mappers, but in actual fact, we think it's probably should be easy enough to use without a mapper, and I think that's one of the pain points of the Java driver at the moment because it doesn't support generics and because it does a lot of things in a not very intuitive way. People are writing their own frameworks on top of it. So that's interesting feedback in its own right. Yes? Yeah, so the comment is around being able to reuse bits of those queries. So, you know, a query with a sort and a filter or just a select, you know, basically reusing some of these things again and again in different parts of the code base. The existing API makes that quite difficult. The Fluent API is designed to solve that problem. In fact, at the moment, it returns a collection stream inspired by the Java 8 streams so that you can pass that thing around. And immutability is quite important to us as well. So you should be able to chuck that thing around and not worry too much about what's happening to it. No one said DB object. That's interesting. Last time, is David here? Last time I gave this talk, someone was like, I really hate DB object because it returns you an object and you have to cast it to whatever you want to. It's basically an old school map, which means that you have to cast everything. And when I first started using the driver, I was just really not keen on the casting everywhere. It felt like I was coding back in 1999 again. It's not cool at all. Okay, well, I've got what I need from you. You're now allowed to ask me any questions that you want. About design, about MongoDB, about the Java driver, about my stupid drawings, about monsters. How long did it take to get everyone to change the code to meet all the rules after I put them in there? How long did it take? I think I put them in about Christmas. And we went and we got completely zero last week. In terms of check style, we cleared all the check style rules I was doing it in meetings and conferences. It's the sort of thing I love. That sort of mundane. It's really stupid, but I kind of like that mundane coding thing. If you've got a day which is full of meetings and you've got half an hour here and half an hour there, which I don't get very often, but every now and again I do, you can just go in and fix 30 check style errors, and I get great satisfaction from that gamification. So I did a lot of the check style stuff, but when it came to the find bug stuff, I basically divvied them out. We've got me and Jeff, but there's another guy as well, an offshore guy, and I basically said, look, you guys have worked in that area, you've worked in that area. We're down to 40 find bugs errors. If we work on this, we can just get rid of them, and they got rid of them within about 2 days. So it's this idea of being able to tick stuff off, see the little charts go down, and feel really good about having achieved something. I was surprised. I thought people would be more like, oh, I don't see why the curly brace needs to be on a different line. Yeah. Yeah, so how much am I suppressing errors versus fixing errors for check style, PMD, and find bugs? I think percentage-wise, we might be suppressing like between 1% and 5%. I don't know. We're definitely suppressing some of them, and often the PMD error will be the same as the find bugs error, so you have to suppress it for both. But I've found that lots of the things are stuff that need fixing. Particularly find bugs really did find bugs. It did find stuff that we needed to fix. And the thing is that actually, when find bugs give you something and you're like, I don't really know what that means, and that looks difficult to fix, it probably is a bug. If it's not that easy to fix, because it's telling you, your code's inside out and your if statement isn't really doing anything, yeah, it's probably a bug. You probably need to change the actual code, not just reformat it so it fits the rules. So we did find bugs by fixing these bugs. It made us feel very good about spending the effort doing that.
About the same question, did you have progress of doing at all agree in the PMD rules, for example? Because sometimes it's about length of names of methods and classes and things like
Yeah.
that.
So did we argue over what those rules should be, basically? Not really, actually, and that was the other thing I was surprised about. I kind of took the default sun checks, and I took the default find bugs checks, and I took the PMD ones, the default ones. I cut out the ones which were contradicting each other, because that doesn't give you anything. I cut out the ones where we had like a million errors, because I'm like, I just don't have time for this. But things like method names, method lengths, width of lines. I kind of picked some arbitrary ones and figured that if people have got a problem with that, they can talk to me. We used to have this thing at LMAX where we used to say, if you've got 3 people agree on changing the rule, then that's quorum and you can change that rule. There's only 3 of us working on the Java code, so now we all have to agree. But mostly we're kind of keen, as long as there are standards, it doesn't really matter that much what they are. Although I was adamant the curly brace belongs on the same line as the if statement, not underneath it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so did we use a code formatter to do some of this stuff? Yeah, I used IntelliJ, and I said and actually that took me quite a long time, getting IntelliJ's default code formatter, to match Checkstyle's default rules. That was a pain in the neck. But that also means you have to share the formatter across everyone as well. So I was checking in the IntelliJ files so that everyone could have them, but then we decided that was a bad idea. I can't remember how we fixed that problem in the end. We might have just done all the fixes and then not shared the formatter afterwards. But yeah, there was one check-in I did where I just reformatted the whole code base, and I just did that in the check-in. Don't do anything else, right? Just do all your white space and your curly braces and all the rest of that. And that was probably the first major chunk of the number of errors. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So the question is around, we were kind of lucky to have this misnamed package for the old stuff versus the new stuff. And it's true, because a lot of the other drivers don't have this problem. They've got the correct namespacing. And that's actually one of the reasons as well that we're thinking about how we're going to name some of the methods. We've got this tension between trying to come up with a name which we're all going to use, which we all agree with, which may or may not be the same as the existing name of, say, find versus filter. Right? If we move to a new name, that means that we've automatically namespaced all the drivers into this new thing. Always use filter instead of using find. This is kind of part of the Streams API. However, all our existing documentation talks about find. Right? So we have this problem of we kind of want to namespace some stuff by just renaming it to something else, but then everyone's really familiar with the other terminology, and are we then talking about a ubiquitous language? Not necessarily. So we've thought about a few different ways of doing stuff. I think, and it is quite subtle, the fact that you've got com MongoDB Mongo client and org MongoDB Mongo client, and then when you're actually looking at your actual code base, it's going to be Mongo client, right? So you're not really going to know whether you're using the old one or the new one. So it's something we've thought about and something we think about and worry about, but I'm not sure, until we start really talking to real users, I'm not sure what's going to turn out to be the right answer for that. My time's up. I might be able to take one more question. What can we do in the future and we don't have the lucky accident of the namespacing? Good question. I don't know. I mean, the Mongo client thing is fairly new, actually. We changed some of our defaults on the server, and lots of the drivers have a root class, obviously, to get into the driver, and they're all called lots of different things. The old one on the old version of Java was just called Mongo, and we decided across the board that all drivers were now going to have a root class called Mongo client, and that was going to conform to the new specification. So going forward, maybe we'll do something else like that again, or maybe we'll have different interfaces, or I think it will depend a bit on the case. All right, I think I'm going to have to finish now, but thank you very much.